Well, good evening, and welcome to tonight's lecture in the Global Public Health Lecture Series. And tonight's lecture is brought to you by a triumvirate of sponsors. We've got the Global Public Health Program, and the International Institute for Health and Humanities, and the Irish Studies Program, who are all sponsoring tonight's talk. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Nora O'Brien. She's going to be talking on nutritional status of lactating women and their children in 2 agroecological zones of rural Ethiopia. Following her BSc in food science from the University College of Cork, Nora completed a master's in nutrition at the University of Minnesota here in the United States. She then did a PhD in nutritional biochemistry at Cornell University and was a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Louvain. She returned to a lectureship in nutrition at the University College Cork in 1989. She has extensive teaching duties, including a module on human nutrition in the developing world. Her research program on the relationship between nutrition and health has grown successfully over the years. She's obtained over €8 million in competitive grant awards from national and international funding sources. These funds have supported the research activity of approximately 50 individuals whom Nora has supervised at master's, PhD, and postdoctoral levels. The group's work has resulted in over 200 peer-reviewed research publications in international scientific literature, as well as numerous conference presentations. In recent years, she's developed a research program in the area of human nutrition in developing world countries. And some of this she will be discussing in this evening's lecture. So I guess you can see how privileged we are, fortunate we are, to have Nora come all the way from Ireland to be here for this lecture. And so she also gets the award for coming the longest distance to give a lecture in the Global Public Health Lecture Series over the entire 6 years now that we've been doing this lecture series. So please join me in welcoming Nora to the lecture.
Sorry, Peter, how did you clip this on? I'm sorry. Oh, I get it, I see it. Okay. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank Peter very much for inviting me to present in this lecture series, and I'm very happy to be here and to tell you about the work we have done in Africa. So this is the title of the presentation tonight, and Peter's already went through this title. He's also went through my career to date, so I'll skip over this slide. And I just want to show you where I'm from, where I'm working at the moment. Ireland, the most westerly country in Europe. You can see it there. Small little country. Population in the south of about 4.7 million people, and there's about 1.8 million in the north. And we are in Cork, which is in the south coast. It's the second city in the country, and Dublin, as you probably are aware, is the capital, which is on the eastern side of the country. So that's where we work and live. And as also Peter said, in the last 2 years, I have developed a research program in the area of human nutrition in developing countries. And currently I'm involved in 2 large projects. One is called the AgriDiet project, which is the project I'll talk to you about tonight. And the second one is the development of this novel fortified blended foods. With both of these projects, I work closely with Tom, my husband, who is here tonight. And Tom, in fact, discussed the second project just earlier in the public health seminar series. He talked about the fortified blended food projects. So I'm going to talk about the AgriDiet project. So the AgriDiet project is where we looked at the nutritional status of lactating mothers and young children in rural Ethiopia. The project was funded by Irish Aid. As the title explained earlier, we did look at 2 agroecological zones in rural Ethiopia, and I'll come back to this in a little bit. We also looked at the nutritional status of these population groups both in the pre-harvest and the post-harvest seasons. So we wanted to see if there was a seasonal effect on the nutritional status of lactating mothers and young children. who are a particularly vulnerable group in states of food shortages. So Ethiopia and the eastern side of Africa, it's the second most populous country in Africa. There's about 100 million people in Ethiopia. A very high birth rate, with about in excess of 4 children per female. And it's actually projected that the population of Ethiopia will double in the next 30 years. Also, about 80% of the population live in rural areas in Ethiopia. So that's where it is in relation to the continent. And then our field sites within Ethiopia, we worked, one of our field sites was in the Mekelle region. Go back. Mekelle, which is up here. And this is what we call a midland agri-ecological zone. And the second site where we collected data was in Harar. We're calling this the lowland agri-ecological zone. And Harar, as you see, is in the eastern part of the country, not that far from Somalia. So there were our two sites in the northern part of the country and the eastern part of the country, what we're calling midland and lowland zones. AgriDiet was a very large project. It's a partnership of 8 universities and research institutions in Ireland, the UK, Ethiopia and Tanzania. It was led by University College Cork. The partners in Cork kind of did the work in Ethiopia, and Tom and myself took care of the nutritional sciences aspect of the project, and our colleagues in the University College Dublin focused on Tanzania. So that's how it worked. So within Ethiopia, our partner universities were Mekelle University, which is in the northern part in the Tigrayan region, and then we had Haramaya University, which is in the eastern part in the Oromia region. And just a little bit more about the study details. As I said, there was 2 zones. These are the 2 zones. The lowland zone was about 1,000 to 1,500 meters above sea level. It's in eastern Oromia, as I said, near the Somalia region. And sorghum and maize were the staples that are consumed in this region. Interestingly as well in this region, they have 2 fairly standard or cash crops. These are crops that they grow and sell for cash rather than, in the case of groundnuts, consume. So groundnuts is one of them, but chat is another one. It's grown as a cash crop. Now chat is a legally grown narcotic plant. It's widely consumed in the Islamic areas, and a lot of chat was grown in this region. The midland zone then is characterized by being about 2,000 meters above sea level. It's in south central Tigray, that's the northern region. And in contrast here, teff, barley, and animal husbandry were the main agricultural features. So different, quite different to the lowland zone. So they're the 2 zones. And then, as I said, we also looked at the seasons. So post-harvest is the dry season. This is when they've just finished the harvesting. That would be January and February. And the pre-harvest is the rainy season, and that's July and August in Ethiopia. We selected our subjects from 4 randomly cabals in each zone. They were randomly selected in each zone. Now a cabal is the smallest administrative unit in Ethiopia, and within every cabal you would have lots of different villages. We ended up with having 216 mother-child pairs in our study, the nutritional science study, and we had to get ethical approval for our work, and that was we sought that from UCC, from Haramaya University, and the Ethiopian government. So we were granted approval from all these agencies. So to assess the nutritional status of mothers and children in the study, we used a variety of indicators. Anthropometry, which is data on body measurements like height, weight. MUAC. MUAC is mid-upper arm circumference. We did dietary assessments, 24-hour recall. So we asked the mother to recall what she consumed over the last 24 hours. We asked the mother to recall what the children consumed over the last 24 hours. We also looked at other dietary indicators like dietary diversity scores and minimum meal frequency, and I'll come back to these later and explain what they are. We also got blood samples from both the mothers and the infants. And then what we did with those was we looked at iron and zinc status in the blood. We also collected urine samples from the mother and analysed iodine in the urine samples. And additionally, we had extensive questionnaires, and they were used to determine household mother and child characteristics, such as age, education, parity, wash, which Tom talked about, water, hygiene and sanitation, access to health services, etc. So with the totality of all of these indicators, we were able to paint a picture of the nutritional status of the mothers and their infants in the two agroecological zones. We've published a lot of this work, and here's a list of 6 of the publications that have been published to date. We've one other under review, and we're preparing another one. So we're not finished yet. Now, a little bit about the agroecological zones, the 2 zones that we collected the data from. The populations in these 2 areas have different traditions, different cultures, different lifestyles and diets. In the Midland area, for example, again up in the northern part of Ethiopia, the staple food is injera, and that's made typically from about 75% teff and 25% wheat or barley. And it's a fermented bread-like product. That's their staple. And that's served with locally prepared sauces. The sauces are known as wats, and the sauces may be made from legumes or vegetables. In the lowland area, eastern Ethiopia near Somalia, unleavened bread made from sorghum or maize is the staple. And again, that's served with locally prepared sauces. The consumption of animal food sources is very low in both areas, but particularly in the lowland area. So they don't eat much meat or eggs or other animal foodstuffs, milk, etc. In addition, what we found was the intake of phytate-rich cereal-based foodstuffs was high, and especially high in the lowland region, the eastern region. Phytates are present in cereal-type foodstuffs, and they bind important minerals like iron and zinc and decrease the bioavailability of these important micronutrients. Also, the intake of vitamin C-rich foods was low, and that's significant as well because vitamin C actually enhances iron absorption. So the combination of both led to, as we saw, problems with iron and zinc nutrition. So let me take you through some pictures of the areas. This is the northern part. Tom and myself visited Ethiopia in 2004, I think is when we were there, in February. So this was the dry season. So this is an image from the Tigrayan region. It's very dry at the moment because it's February, it's the dry season, but this would be nice, green and lush in the rainy season. Here are some women, local women from the region, and many women in this region have to collect water and take it to their homes, often long distances. The women in our study typically weighed about 100 pounds, and these women could be carrying up to 50 pounds weight in water. Here is a house, an image of a house that's typical of the Tigrayan region, stone house with thatched roof, and usually they have an enclosed walled area in which they store the cattle overnight or house the cattle overnight. And this is an image of the cattle that are quite thin. They wouldn't produce much milk, I would suspect. In this region, they do eat some animal foodstuffs, but a lot of the farmers actually sell the animals for cash rather than consume them at home. Typical kitchen, and you see where they, oh, I'm doing the wrong one, this one. No, sorry, I won't use it. Here is where they light the fire, and then the hot plate is where they cook the injera, and that's looking down onto the hot plate. So very rudimentary kitchens. Here's your injera. This is what it looks like. The fermented bread-like or pancake-like injera, and there are the various wats. This picture was taken in a hotel in Mekelle. In the rural areas, they would not be eating that many sauces on their injera. Maybe they might have only one sauce made from legumes or made from vegetables. But this is a very healthy meal of injera and wats. There are not many trees in this region, so the fuel that people use to cook and make their injera is animal done, that they dry first and then use it to light the fire. And here's one of our study participants. It's a mainly Christian area up in the Tigrayan region. This young lady was 20 years old, and this is her second child. They get married young, they have children young, and as I said, the birth rate is quite high. So this is her second child. This is her home. She wanted us to see her home. It was one room, but she had some furniture, a bed, and there's a second bed over here, and that's her first child there on the bed. And these are some children from this region. I showed this image because I wanted to point out that many of them don't wear footwear. Some of them had some little plastic shoes on, but the majority of them don't have footwear. And they're running around and playing in amongst the areas where the animals are. It's quite unhygienic. This little girl kept following us. There she is in the green. And as I said, there's many children, many lovely, beautiful children, a very high birth rate. We then travelled to the Oromaya region in the eastern part to see the lowland region. And here I am with our student, Kedar. Kedar did his PhD in University College Cork. He collected all the fieldwork in Ethiopia, in the midland zone and the lowland zone. He came to UCC and did the data analysis, wrote up the papers, wrote up his PhD, successfully defended it. So his PhD is from University College Cork. He has since returned to the University of Haramaya, where he's now a lecturer in nutrition. This region, the eastern region, is mainly Islamic. Lots of children again, but camels, quite a lot of camels in this area because it's very dry. And I think Tom mentioned earlier that they actually have suffered a severe drought in the recent past in this region. We linked up with the community health worker. This is Kedar with the community health worker, who wanted to show us what she did and show us the community health centre that she worked in. So we joined her and we went with her to the community health centre, and there she was demonstrating to us what her work involved. She explained to us that there was quite an issue in this area with severe acute malnutrition, wasting. SAM, as it's abbreviated as SAM, severe acute malnutrition. Tom again discussed this earlier. And she explained to us how she follows this UNICEF chart in the management of severe acute malnutrition. Typically these community health workers are females, and they're very well respected in the community, and they do a fantastic job. She showed us some of the measurement techniques she had in the community health centre. What I have here in my hand is the MUAC tape. So how this MUAC tape works is you measure the waist, the mid-upper arm waist circumference of the child. If the tape ends up in the red region, it indicates that that child is suffering from severe acute malnutrition. If it ends up in the yellow, it's moderate acute malnutrition, and green would be a normal weight child. So they're color-coded for ease of use. This is a linked board to measure the length or height of a child that can't stand, a small child that's under the age of 1. So they use a linked board, so that was available in the health centre as well. And also there was a lot of this product, ready-to-eat therapeutic foods. There's a couple of boxes of this in the health centre. And this is what the community health worker would give to the children that suffer from SAM. She would give them a prescribed amount of this ready-to-eat therapeutic foods over the course of a few weeks, and monitor their recovery by measuring their MUAC and measuring their height and weight. So following that visit, we then went out to meet some of our participants in this lowland region and look at the houses. They're quite different to what we saw in the Tigrayan region. This is one of our subjects. We are in her home, much more sparsely furnished, no furniture at all in fact, just mats on the floor. These people slept on those mats. The lady is very small, and she's had 6 children. This is her kitchen, so again we can see she has to collect the water, and the cooking facility is very similar to what we saw in the Tigrayan region. Here's the unleavened bread made from sorghum or wheat. Okay. and another home with more mothers and their infants in this region. The peanuts, the groundnuts, they're grown widely in this region, but the people don't consume them. They sell them as a cash crop, as a source of income. Peanuts could be quite nutritious as part of their diet, but they typically do not eat them. They sell them for cash. And as we were there visiting a second participant in our study, a man came in and emptied a sack of peanuts. She examined them. She decided she'd buy them from him, and she then was going to take them to the market the next day herself and try and sell them for a higher price and make a little profit. So that's how it worked. This lady herself had 5 children. And here's the chat, the other cash crop that's grown widely in this lowland region. It's mainly men are involved in selling of the chat, and as I said, it's a product that is widely consumed in the Islamic regions. Widely used, I suppose. Well, it's chewed. That's how they use it. So what I'm going to do now for the rest of my presentation is show you some of the papers that we've published and talk about a little bit about the outcomes or the findings in these publications. So this was the first paper we published from our study. And we're looking at the mothers here, looking at the nutritional status and anemia in the 2 zones, and also looking at the seasonal effects. This is a table from this paper, and I said I'd show it you because it shows some of the characteristics of these mothers. So what we have is the variables down here on the first column, and then the category, how those variables are categorized, and then the total, and then it's divided into lowland and midland. I'm not going to go through all these numbers with you. I'm afraid to use this in case it. Oh, there it is. So if we look at age, first of all, for example, about 56% of the women in our study were in this age category, 25 to 34. If we look at education, it's an interesting one. In terms of the total number, about 73% of the women were illiterate. And that didn't vary that much between lowland and midland. Okay. So a high rate of illiteracy. Occupation, farmer, housewife, 91%. The vast majority of them were either housewives or they farmed. And again, that did not vary between midland and lowland. A parity, as I explained, if we look at the numbers there, the equal to or greater than 4 children. Again, the number is, the number is 66% total. And again, that didn't vary much between lowland and midland. So let's just move down to the last few. I just want to highlight these before I move on. Consumption of animal source food in a month. Never. 58%, close to 58%, said they never consumed animal foods in a month. But if we look at the difference between the lowland and the midland, we have an interesting finding here. In the lowland, it was as high as 81%, said they never consumed animal foodstuffs within the month, and this was about 33% in the midland region. So a lot less animal food consumption in the lowland compared to the midland region. Similar finding for eggs. This is eggs in a month, never, total about close to 50% said they never consumed eggs. And again, there's a higher percentage of women in the lowland region said they never consumed eggs compared to the midland region. And the last one I just want to mention is consumption of tea, coffee in a week. And the variable here was either no or yes. If we look at the yeses, about totally 61%. But again, there's a difference between the lowland and the midland. Much higher rate of tea and coffee consumption in the lowland compared to the midland. And this is significant from a nutritional perspective as well, as I'll explain in a little bit. But one of the reasons, of course, why there was higher tea and coffee consumption in the lowland region is that coffee is grown in this region. It's partly the reason why they were drinking more, but it's also a cultural and traditional issue. So there are some of the characteristics. But going back to our paper, the aim again was to determine the seasonal and the agroecological variations in anemia and nutritional status among the lactating mothers. So this focused just on the mothers. And there's a lot of numbers here now, so I'll try and summarize it for you. But what we saw was anemia increased overall from about 22% in the post-harvest. This is when they have food, to as high as 41% in the pre-harvest lean season. So rates of anemia were high anyway, even after the harvest, but then 6 months later, in the pre-harvest season, in the lean season, it had increased to almost 41%. Almost 1 in 2 women were suffering from anemia. So there's a strong seasonal effect there. But if we look at the separate regions, we see some interesting findings as well. Anemia increased from a low value of 8.6% to 34% in the midland zone, and from 34 to about 46% in the lowland zone. So there was a stronger seasonal effect in the midland zone, a less strong seasonal effect in the lowland zone, but the numbers were much worse in the lowland zone. Okay? We speculate that the low prevalence of anemia in the midland zone in both seasons may be due to the difference in diet, partly. For example, teff and legumes were the main staples in the midland zone. This is in the Tigrayan region. Teff is a fermented product. Okay, you start with a cereal, but it's fermented. And when you ferment a cereal, you break down the phytates. And therefore, the bioavailability of iron from your injera would be much higher than it would be from the unleavened bread that they were consuming in the lowland area. Legumes also are a reasonably good source of iron. The high tea and coffee consumption in the lowland area may contribute to poor bioavailability of iron, because tea and coffee contain tannins, and if your dietary intake is low anyway, and you consume a meal with tea and coffee, that will even decrease the amount of iron that's bioavailable in that meal. So these could be some of the contributing factors, the difference in the diet. So that's the anemia situation. Worse in the lowland area, but a stronger seasonal effect seen in the midland area. And then when we looked at the nutritional status of the mothers, there's 2 indexes used here to assess nutritional status: body mass index and MUAC. You can use MUAC on adults as well. And if we look at the BMI data, again, we see an increase from post-harvest to pre-harvest season. But what I would point out there is even in the post-harvest season, in the plentiful season, the number of women with BMI of less than 18.5 is very high, 42% of women. Like, for example, in Ireland, less than 1% of women would have a BMI of less than 18.5. So these women are very thin and very underweight. And they become even more underweight between the post and the pre-harvest season. The MUAC values give us the same trends. From these findings as well, we were also able to conclude that mothers with more children, mothers with poor educational status, and poor dietary diversity were more likely to be anemic. We saw a correlation there between anemia and these other factors. Now, the next study that I'll discuss is focusing on the children. Okay? And we're going to look, I'll just give you some of the data from this study. What I'll focus on is just the nutritional status of the children and how it changed with season. So to determine if the child malnutrition followed similar patterns to that of their mothers in both seasons. So that's what we're looking at here. So child stunting, and as Tom has, if any of you were at Tom's lecture, he defined that, and it's inadequate height for age. That's what stunting is. And we saw that that increased in prevalence from close to 40% in the post-harvest season to 46%. So we did see an increase in stunting. But look at the numbers. Even in the post-harvest season, 40% of the children were stunted. So it's very high. And as Tom explains, stunting is a very significant issue. Because not alone are they stunted in terms of height, but they're probably stunted in terms of intellectual development as well. So stunting, big issue, and it has a seasonal effect. When we looked at child underweight, this is inadequate weight for age. Again, we saw an increase from post-harvest to pre-harvest. So there's a seasonal effect here as well. And we also saw that both the child stunting and underweight were somewhat worse in the lowland zone. So in terms, just to summarize, in terms of the seasonal effects, what did we see? Well, households in the midland zone, the northern region, had less opportunity to make money from cash crops during the pre-harvest lean season. Therefore, we speculate that they were more susceptible to seasonal effects. Okay? Now, the anemia rates were quite low in the Tigrayan region in the post-harvest season, but they did jump to 34% in the lean season. Okay, so we speculate that that's because people didn't have enough money. They ran out of the stored food, and they didn't have enough money to buy additional foods because they didn't have these cash crops. However, the overall nutritional status of both mothers and children were poor in the lowland zone. And also in the lowland zone, chat is a major cash crop, as I've explained earlier, and it is harvested primarily in the rainy season, and that's the lean season. And this possibly accounts for the lower impact of seasonality that we saw in this zone. Okay? So the situation didn't get too worse between post and pre, but the values were much worse than the midland zone, the overall values. Okay, so that's seasonal effects. Other studies. This one is where we looked at anemia and undernutrition among the children in the two zones in the post-harvest period. So if I just move on quickly and just tell you what the aim of this study was. It was a cross-sectional study, so it's not looking at the two seasons, it's just looking at one time point, that's the post-harvest period when there was more food around. And we just looked at the rates of anemia and undernutrition in the children in the post-harvest period. So of the 216 children that we assessed, 54% were anemic and close to 40% were stunted in the post-harvest period when the food was supposedly more plentiful. So the numbers are fairly stark. Again, anemia prevalence was higher in the lowland zone than the midland zone. We're seeing that consistently in all our studies. But here we were able to relate the child's anemia with other factors. So we found that the anemia, the child anemia, was significantly associated with children not achieving minimal meal frequency. In other words, they didn't have enough meals in the day. Sickness during the last 2 weeks. If they were sick in the last 2 weeks, they were increased their risk of becoming anemic. If they were stunted children had higher rates of anemia. Low maternal BMI. If their mother had a low BMI, that increased the chance that the child would be suffering from anemia. And with maternal anemia, if the mother was anemic herself, and if the mother didn't wash her hands, we also saw an association there between that behaviour and child anemia. And then when we looked at the predictors of stunting, we found that the predictors of stunting were age and sex of the child, higher rates of stunting in male children. And we're not the first to see that. That's been reported elsewhere as well. Not achieving minimum meal frequency, maternal BMI and age, younger mothers were more likely to have stunted children. And we also saw that as maternal height increased, the likelihood of stunting of the child decreased. So these are some of the factors that were related to stunting. But as Tom explained earlier, stunting is a very complex issue. There's many, many factors involved. But we were able to associate within our study these factors with the stunting rates. Another study, concurrent iron and zinc deficiencies in lactating mothers and the children. As I said, we were able to take blood from the mothers and the children, and we were able to measure iron and zinc levels in the blood and then assess whether, using those indicators, whether the mothers and children suffer from iron deficiency or zinc deficiency. So just the first 2 bullet points, just defining some terms for you. Ferritin is the storage form of iron, because we measured ferritin in the blood. That's the storage form of iron. And low blood ferritin levels is an indication of iron deficiency. Okay? Low blood zinc levels is an indicator of zinc deficiency. So what did we find? Well, we found that low blood levels of ferritin and zinc were found in 44% and 67% of children, respectively. So in other words, 44% of children had low ferritin levels, 67% of children had low zinc levels. Very high. And zinc is a very important nutrient for growth. High rates of stunting. So all these are linked. With the mothers, almost 20% had low blood levels of ferritin, and 72% of mothers had low blood levels of zinc. So zinc is a key nutrient That's very low in these populations. Where do you find zinc? Animal foodstuffs is the richest source of dietary zinc. We saw a strong, very strong correlation between iron and zinc status with the mothers and the children. Not surprising, I guess. And deficiency in both iron and zinc was seen in 20% of the mothers and 32% of the children. Deficiency in either zinc or iron was seen in 50% of the mothers and 46% of the children. So very high rates of deficiencies. And the last two bullet points there, we noted as well that in the 24 hours before bloods were taken, about 82% of mothers and 92% of children consume foods that can decrease zinc bioavailability. Again, foods that contain phytates, your cereals, okay, unrefined cereal type foods. And in the 24 hours before bloods were taken, we also found that 2.5% of mothers and 3.7% of children consumed meat, which is a good dietary source of both iron and zinc. So very low intakes of meat in the 24 hours before the blood was taken. So that was that study. And this is the final one I'm going to discuss with you. I'm not going to go through all of the 6 of them because I think we get confused with all the information. But this one I said I would include as well because I think it's an interesting one. And the title of it is Infant and Young Child Feeding Practices Among the Mothers of Children in Our Study Population. So before I talk about this paper, I just want to discuss what are these infant, young child feeding practices. What does it mean? Well, the World Health Organization has what they call the infant, young child feeding indicators of best practice. And their indicators include what they're calling minimal meal frequency, minimal dietary diversity, and minimal acceptable diet. And they're defined here for you. Okay, so we calculated these also in our study. So minimum meal frequency is essentially how many times the child consumed food in the day in a period of time in 24 hours. So the actual definition here is the proportion of breastfed and non-breastfed children who receive solid, semi-solid, or soft foods or milk feeds, the minimum number of times or more per 24 hours. So the minimum number of times for a child that's being breastfed and 6 to 8 months of age is 2. That's the minimum. For a child that's being breastfed and is in the age range 9 months to 23 months, it's 3 times. And if a child is not being breastfed, then it's 4 is the minimum number of times the child should be fed this complementary food. So it's just how much food the child is eating. So that's minimum meal frequency. Now, minimum dietary diversity is the proportion of children who receive foods from 4 or more of the following groups, food groups, in a 24-hour period. Food groups are listed there, so 4 or more. And the idea here is that the more diverse your diet, the less likelihood they'll be deficient in micronutrients. Very few people in Western countries are deficient in micronutrients because we eat a very varied diet. But here, it's injera, or it's the unleavened bread, and just maybe 1 or 2 watts. A very undiversified diet. So this is how we calculate minimum dietary diversity. And then minimal acceptable diet is a combination of these two together. Okay, so they're the indicators, the World Health Organization IYCF indicators that are used. So what did we find? Well, our aim here was to provide updated information on current IYCF practices, and these data then would help in the design of interventions to increase compliance with recommended practices and help reduce undernutrition. Like the World Health Organization guidelines for children is that they should be breastfed solely up to the age of 6 months and then complementary foods introduced. In fact, the WHO guidelines is that breastfeeding should continue up to the age of 2 with the introduction of complementary foods beyond 6 months of age. So what did we find? Well, we found that 95% of our children were breastfed, of whom close to 60% were breastfed within 1 hour of birth. That's good infant, young child feeding practice. However, we also found that 51%, close to or just over half of the children, received complementary feeding before 6 months of age. That's bad infant, young child feeding practice. In the 24 hours preceding the survey, only 4%, 4.6% and close to 2% of children consumed vitamin A rich foods and iron rich foods respectively. So very low intakes of vitamin A rich foods, which would be highly coloured foods, and iron rich foods. Of course, the best source of iron rich foods would be your heme iron, it's most bioavailable animal foodstuffs. So very low intake of those types of foodstuffs. Likewise, in the previous 24 hours, there's a lot of numbers here now, 50%, I'll round them off, 22% and 12% of children achieved the minimal meal frequency, adequate dietary diversity, and minimal acceptable diet, respectively. They were the terms I just described. But look, the conclusion is in the next bullet point. Thus, what we conclude from this is that only approximately 1 out of 9 children achieves the WHO criteria for infant young child feeding best practice overall in our study population. And therefore our conclusion to our work was that mothers of childbearing age should be educated on IYCF. So, rather than going through another few of our studies, I thought I might conclude at this stage, because I think you've got a good idea of some of the findings, and I've tried to capture them here on this slide. What we can conclude from our work in Ethiopia, that in line with other published work, and indeed national surveys that have been conducted in Ethiopia, nutritional status of mothers and children was poor in our study group. Nutritional status tended to deteriorate during the pre-harvest lean season. In other words, food stores were inadequate to tide the households over until the next harvest was completed. Therefore, our study group in both zones is or was very vulnerable to any unexpected shocks. Okay? They didn't quite have enough food, so if there was any unexpected shock in between, that would really push them over the edge. While nutritional status was poor in both regions, it tended to be worse in the lowland zone. And that's where I will conclude my overview of the work we did in Ethiopia.
Okay, we have time for questions.
I guess, did you guys come up with any recommendations for this issue that's clearly prevalent?
Where do we start?
Yeah.
Well, recommendations of education. A lot of these people are very poor. You can educate them, but they need the funding to buy the foodstuffs. Tom, how would you answer that question? I'll turn over to you.
I'd say it comes back to something I showed in my presentation, the kind of UNICEF conceptual framework of nutritional status. It's multifactorial, ranges from having a stable country with good governance, good institutions of the state, infrastructure, education structures, women's entitlements, gender equality, water, sanitation, hygiene.
Right.
Everything we take for granted and really don't appreciate in countries like Ireland and the US. Wonderful things, clean water, proper sanitation, education, rights. That's what basically has to be addressed. And this is really hard in Ethiopia because it's a fundamentally quite unstable at the moment. There's a lot of ethnic issues, very, very treacherous waters at the moment.
And our study was conducted in the rural parts. And as you saw, the lowland areas is much poorer than the midland zone. And there's actually unrest in the lowland areas now. So the situation probably getting worse rather than better. But if you go to somewhere like Addis, the capital in Ethiopia, you see a very different picture. It's a very progressive city. We were in Ethiopia 2 or 3 times, and the difference, the change in Addis between the 2 or 3 years gap between our first visit and our last visit was incredible. There's just these skyscrapers shooting up. And do you know what you see in Ethiopia? In Addis? You see obese people. So it's, so the rural areas are still very, very poor, and that's where you're going to see states of undernutrition. But in the big city like Addis, it's in moving through this nutrition transition, and you're seeing other nutrition issues appearing.
Did you see anybody that is addressing the food security issue in a positive or progressive way, or is the government trying to address this? Because what you come back to is they don't have enough food. Whether it's the right food or not, they don't have enough food to start off with. And across Africa, you have hungry seasons or lean seasons.
Yeah, yeah.
Is anything happening in Ethiopia, or is it so unstable that?
Again, I'm going to ask Tom to.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, well, I gave a presentation earlier and I showed the long-term picture overall. I mean, things have improved over the last 25, 30 years, even in Ethiopia. Stunting levels that Nora showed there that are absolutely shocking. We're much worse if you go back 20, 25 years ago. They're doing their best, you know. But you're dealing now with a ticking time bomb, which is demographics, and the birth rate there is extraordinarily high. This population, second most populous country in Africa, is going to double in size within 25 years, you know. How they're going to handle that against ongoing droughts, political instability and so on is, you know, very worrisome. But people on the ground are doing their absolute best, you know.
Let me follow it up just a second, because it was kind of interesting. I thought that about 50% of the people have used contraception, women have used contraception. Is there any religious taboo on using the contraception, or how does that get out? Is that increasing?
Well, the birth rate is gradually coming down there. I mean, it used to be higher, but the problem is there's such a momentum of people now that with an average birth rate now of 4, and infant survival is much higher, which is a good thing. But most of those 4 will, the majority will survive to adulthood. I mean, you're talking 2 to replace mom and dad, so that's doubling population 1 generation, you know. So
Yeah, it may, like the numbers I said, it would double in, we don't know, that's a prediction. People are migrating into the kind of urban areas also. Addis is growing huge. Michaela, the city up in the north, is getting bigger. And as people move into the cities, they have less children. You know, so that's only a prediction, and you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. So. Yeah, there's a.
Yes.
Why don't you introduce yourself? We just happen to have Professor Solomon Gofi here from Ethiopia, and he's been in residence for the last year here at the University of Montana, so we're really fortunate to have your perspective on this.
Well, thank you, but that's too much. An introduction, just a participant. Hey, I really enjoyed the presentation, honestly, the whole work, the research, wonderful. But what I just wanted to add is the picture can even be more complex than this one. Not only, you know, in Addis Ababa and big towns, there are areas in Ethiopia where, you know, the central north, including the southern regions, where, you know, the nutrition can be diverse, and at the same time, you know, well balanced. Even, you know, there could be variations within many settings in rural Ethiopia. Yeah. There are surplus producing areas, you know, north, central, and southern, including southeastern regions, especially Mali and RC areas. These are areas, especially RC is also a place where the famous athletes also come. So my concern was that, you know, the 2 places selected appeared to be similar, more or less similar, semi-arid regions of the country.
Yeah.
It can even be more complex when we look at the cultures in both places. Where you are right, these places are different. The northern area, Tigray area, is Christian, highly conservative, and selective food-wise. I mean, and also without exaggeration, out of the 360 days in a year, maybe about 200 days could be fasting days, which means people do not eat meat and poultry products. Meat products, including meat and chicken, eggs, are forbidden. Yeah. Now we are towards the end of the major fasting season, which is 2 months. So Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, now of course, Tigray is, an archetype, Christian, area. So the food culture is also going to be important, which means, avoiding meat for most part of the year. And I was also wondering, as far as the Eastern Lowland area is concerned, Chad, very good, Chad came in. And I would have really liked you to have included the relationship between using Chad, the stimulant, the narcotic stimulant, and the food habit. Because people during Chad tend to eat less.
Yeah.
So eating less becomes really a culture. And perhaps, I don't know, this is just my speculation, even if, the lowland people you have studied in her areas could have, some of the families you have studied could have some income, including during the pre-harvest area. But the situation is not better than those in the north, as far as some of the indicators are concerned, even if they tend to have a better, income, including during the pre-harvest period. So that is why I've said the food culture itself could have, so it is complex, but I really enjoyed the work and the whole presentation. Thank you.
This is sort of a technical question, but in the second study, it said that stunting increased from 40 to 46% comparing the pre and post-harvest. How do you measure that? Is that sort of the growth rate during certain parts of the year?
It's height for age, and these are rapidly growing children. The age group is 6 months to 2 years, so you would capture it even in 6 months, even over that short period of time. And it's compared to growth charts.
And that's measured at the end of the pre-harvest?
Yeah, there was a 6-month gap between the two. Yeah, it was January, February was the post-harvest where we collected the data, and then it was in February the data was collected, and then the pre-harvest was August, so there was about a 6-month gap there.
Yeah.
So you would see an interruption of growth, linear growth in children over that time period.
I think that's an important clarification because the percentage wasn't very high. But if you think about it in terms of 6 months, then it looks much more significant.
Yeah.
In that respect.
Did any of your participants note anything about given demographic change and given climatological change, about the kind of broad picture of crop security, like season to season? Is there a compounding issue with food availability that is driving these trends?
I suppose that's the other part of the AgriDive project. You saw the partnerships involved in the AgriDive project. We just focused on the nutritional status, Tom and myself, but our other colleagues in UCC were looking at agricultural production and answering some of the questions that you have asked there. They're still in the process of analysing our data, and actually part of the aim of AgriDive was to look at the agriculture nutrition linkages. And once they have all of their data analysed, we will be able to start doing that. We started that process already, but we're hoping to look more closely at that and answer some of your questions. At this stage, I can't.
Well, one point I'd make is in the Armia region where we gathered data in 2014 in both February and August, the situation has deteriorated very significantly. I think I showed some of those data from the famine early warning system there operated by the United Nations because of a severe drought, very severe drought. Water is an issue anyway, but in a severe drought. Apparently very large numbers of animals have died, investigated animals have died in the last couple of years. So an already terrible situation is getting worse.
Can I go back to one of the points you made there about in certain regions in Ethiopia you might have food surplus?
Yeah.
It's only now that the infrastructure within this country is being developed.
Yeah.
The road systems there were not existent 10
Yeah.
years ago. So actually while we were there, we could see the roads being built, being paved. So there's a problem with distribution of food.
That
So
is
if there's a surplus, how do you get it around?
Yeah.
So that's starting to change.
Did you look at, as far as for anemia in women, any maybe short-term spikes, like look at like birthing or postpartum complications?
No. We just took the blood samples at the two time points that I mentioned, the
Mhm.
January, February time point, and then, yeah. So these were lactating women. Yeah. So, yeah, not while they were having a child or anything. We didn't include women that were pregnant. We included women that were lactating and their children, if they fell within that age category, 6 to 23 months.
Well, one of the issues that has happened for a long time is the idea that in areas of food shortages and kind of nutritional complications that result, you sometimes find that people are exporting crops to the global north. And I wondered, I saw your peanuts example there. Is that a factor at all? Are they growing crops that are not used for local consumption?
Peanuts, that would be a good example. You know, if they included peanuts in their diet, that would help their nutritional
Right.
status, but
But instead of doing that, those go.
well, maybe
those
not
are
all
export-
households, but a lot of households would sell the peanuts as a cash crop, a source of income.
Into towns.
Yeah, they take their peanuts. This lady that was going to take, I think she was going to go to Jiga. Get a bus to Jiga the next day and try and sell the peanuts at a higher price to make a little profit. It's her income.
That's still keeping it within the region. I'm thinking of shipping it to Europe or something like that, which I don't think is an issue here. And in fact, I think one of the points that both Solomon and you were making, Tom, is that the fact that there was some income from a sale of whether it would be chat or peanuts or whatever, would enable you to then get from the post-harvest time into the pre-harvest time without suffering severe malnutrition. So that income influx can be helpful if you're selling these kinds of products and carry you over when crops aren't available.
Yeah, I think I showed data, from Southeast Asia showing that as people came out of poverty, their nutritional status improves remarkably. But the big issue is poverty, really. If you fix that, you fix so many other things.
If the food is there, it's in the markets, we saw it. The diversity in these local markets, lots of good solutions, but the households, the funding to buy them.
Sal, do you have a question?
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I'd like to add something. I was surprised that I came across CAT, the plant. I actually lived in Yemen for 4 years. I graduated there. And it was a huge discussion among the students and in the country as a whole. And it has two effects. I'm not sure if the Ethiopians consume it there.
They do consume.
And that's another problem.
Yeah.
Because growing it and consuming it, it needs water, a lot of water.
Yeah, it needs
And-
area.
Yeah, and consuming it would prioritize it more than food,
Yeah.
especially the providers for the families. So a father would prefer buying a cigarettes with gas
Yes.
and not feeding his family
Yeah.
because it's a drug.
Yeah.
Yeah, we saw many people consume it when we
Yeah.
were there, even very old people.
Yeah, so Yemen gradually lost, I think, their they used to grow coffee beans, and they lost it because it's easier and it's a cow cache for them to grow cat instead.
That's actually, when we were in Harrow, Harrow's a very famous
Exactly.
coffee area,
That's
and actually coffee is actually being displaced by a cat.
Right.
The significant say the biggest cat is more profitable. So that's exactly the same as what you're saying.
It would be fine if they use the money to increase their diversity, but as you
Yeah.
say, they're not, you know, they're.
Is there any nutritional value to chat?
No. It suppresses your appetite if that's a nutritional value. That's the pressure appetite, right?
Yeah.
So you don't feel hungry. Yeah.
They don't feel
And
hungry.
it keeps you awake.
Yeah,
right?
it gives them energy
Gives you
momentarily.
energy, suppresses
Yeah,
your
just like any stimulant.
Yeah.
Momentarily,
Yeah.
it makes them feel, satisfied,
Yeah.
Yeah.
energized,
Yeah.
and it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
The long distance truck drivers actually chew. They chew.
So then it gets into mother's milk.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Do females chew chat as well? I
Yes.
think it's mostly a male
Yes.
phenomenon.
No.
Yes, they do, especially in child producing areas, areas you have studied.
Yeah.
It is like a habit.
Yeah.
Even, a mother
Yeah.
in a family where they don't produce child, in small towns around these places, even families tend to buy child for children, like children of 11 and 12. It is like, a habit, a universal practice.
Yeah, I remember in the study jams, in the final exams, a generous guy would bring a lot of gas.
Yeah.
But this study, it's.
Stay awake.
Stay awake, yeah.
And we're not recommending this, but
I wonder if it affects nutrient uptake as well. Like, does it bioaccumulate? Like, does this change people's physiology? I mean, like, I know other narcotics do that.
I haven't seen any work in that area,
No.
but
It does depress appetite.
Yeah.
Eat less.
Okay, do we have one final question? If not, I would like, once again, to thank, we got Tom involved in this too, so we should both thank both of them, I think, at this point in time for their wonderful willingness to come all the way to Montana to talk to us about the work that they're doing. And we not only thank you, but we really wish you well because you're still involved in this work, and we really hope that it continues to go forward and that you are really successful in the work that you're doing, and then come back another year or two from now and tell us about all the results of what you've been doing in the last time since you left us. What I always like to do before we end today is to tell you about what's coming up next week. So next week, we're going to shift back to Haiti again. We've already had one talk on Haiti. And Michelle Sayre, who's the director of Nurses for Nurses International, a foundation, is going to talk to us about the evolution of public health in a republic of NGOs. Why aid in Haiti hasn't had a greater impact. Michelle's a member of our external advisory committee who lives in Montana and happens to be director of this Nurses to Nurses International Foundation. So again, I hope to see most of you here next week for that talk. Thanks again.